"You fit the description," the officer said, and the words landed heavier than the metal closing around Ava Johnson's wrists as the cuffs clicked into place under the late afternoon sun, the heat rising off the pavement in slow waves while traffic rolled past at 25 miles per hour like nothing unusual was happening. Like a woman being restrained in the middle of a quiet street was just part of the scenery. But Ava didn't resist, didn't raise her voice. She simply steadied her breath and lifted her gaze, calm and unshaken in a moment designed to break it. Her reflection faintly visible in the polished curve of the cruiser's hood as Officer Daniel Reeves adjusted his stance, his grip firm, his expression certain, the kind of certainty that didn't ask questions because it believed it already had answers. And around them the air tightened as bystanders slowed, a few lifting phones. Curiosity mixing with discomfort, the quiet hum of a city watching without intervening, while Ava's fingers curled slightly against the cool steel, not in fear, but in control, the kind learned over years of being underestimated. And when she finally spoke, her voice was low, measured, almost out of place against the tension pressing in from every direction. "There's a number in my phone," she said, her tone neither pleading nor defensive, just precise, like she was stating a fact that hadn't yet been recognized. Reeves barely glanced at her, a faint scoff slipping through as he reached for the device, its cracked screen catching the sunlight for a brief second before he sealed it inside a clear evidence bag, dismissing her words with the ease of someone who had already decided the outcome. And for a moment, everything seemed to settle into that decision, the scene locking into place, the narrative written without her input, until something shifted, subtle at first, a change in the rhythm of the street. A dark vehicle turning the corner faster than the flow allowed, its engine cutting through the background noise as it approached, tires rolling to a controlled stop just a few feet away, the door opening with quiet precision, and a man stepping out, his posture sharp, his eyes scanning with a focus that didn't belong to the chaos of assumptions surrounding Ava. And then those eyes found her, and everything paused, not loudly, not dramatically, but in that quiet way where meaning arrives before words do. And his expression changed, just enough to fracture the certainty that had filled the space seconds earlier, his voice cutting through the moment, controlled, deliberate. "Ma'am," he began, and for the first time since the cuffs had closed, the balance in the street shifted, invisible but undeniable, like something unseen had just entered the equation and nothing about what was happening could stay the same anymore. The word lingered in the air, quiet but commanding, and for a second no one moved, not the bystanders holding their phones, not Officer Reeves whose grip tightened just slightly, as if instinct told him something had shifted even if his mind had not caught up yet. And Ava remained still, her posture unchanged, her breathing slow and measured as if she had already anticipated this moment long before the cuffs ever touched her wrists. The agent stepped closer, his shoes striking the pavement with controlled precision, eyes never leaving her face as he spoke again, this time lower, sharper. "Ma'am, we have been trying to reach you." And that was when the first crack appeared in Reeves' certainty, subtle but real, like a line forming in glass that had seemed unbreakable just seconds before. He glanced between the agent and Ava, confusion creeping into the space where confidence had lived. "What is this?" Reeves asked, his voice no longer as steady, but the agent did not answer him immediately. Instead, he reached into his jacket, pulling out a badge and holding it just long enough for it to be seen, the gold catching the light in a way that drew every eye in the area. Conversations fading into silence as recognition rippled outward, and suddenly the scene no longer belonged to the officer who had controlled it moments ago. The balance had shifted, and everyone could feel it even if no one said it out loud. Ava's gaze lifted slightly, not in relief, not in triumph, but in quiet acknowledgement, as if this was simply the next step in something already set in motion. "You detained her?" the agent finally said, his tone controlled but edged with something unmistakable, and Reeves straightened instinctively, his training kicking in as he responded. "She matched a description. We were following procedure." The words sounded thinner now, less certain in the presence of someone who did not need to raise his voice to command authority. The agent nodded once, slow, deliberate, then looked back at Ava, his expression softening just enough to signal a shift in tone. "Are you all right?" he asked, and Ava gave the smallest nod, her voice calm when she answered, "I am fine." But her eyes moved briefly toward the evidence bag where her phone sat sealed, a silent indication that she had not forgotten the detail that mattered. The agent followed her gaze and extended his hand, not aggressively, not abruptly, just enough to make it clear what needed to happen next. And for a moment Reeves hesitated, caught between the version of reality he had started with and the one unfolding in front of him. The crowd leaned in closer, sensing the change without fully understanding it. The weight of the situation settling into something heavier than before, something that could not be dismissed as routine anymore. And as the seconds stretched, the sound of another vehicle approaching in the distance began to rise, low at first but growing, deep and unmistakable, like the arrival of something that would not only confirm what was happening but redefine it entirely. And for the first time since the cuffs had closed around Ava's wrists, Officer Reeves felt the ground beneath the moment begin to shift in a way he could no longer control. The low rumble grew louder until the second vehicle came into full view, a black SUV moving with deliberate speed before stopping just behind the first, its engine idling with a quiet authority that seemed to press against the air itself. And when the rear door opened this time, no one spoke. Not the bystanders, not the officers, not even Reeves, whose posture had shifted almost unconsciously, his shoulders tighter, his stance less certain, as another figure stepped out, older, composed, his presence calm in a way that did not demand attention yet commanded it completely. His eyes scanned once, taking in the scene, the cuffs, the gathered crowd, the tension still hanging in place, and then they settled on Ava. And something in his expression changed, not surprise, not confusion, but recognition layered with something deeper, something personal. He walked forward without haste, each step measured, the agent beside him straightening immediately as if aligning to a higher authority. "Sir," the agent said quietly, stepping aside just enough to clear the path. And Reeves felt it then, not just uncertainty, but the unmistakable sense that he had stepped into something far beyond what he had assumed. The man stopped a few feet from Ava, close enough to see the faint reflection of the cuffs against her skin, and for a brief second the noise of the street seemed to fall away entirely, replaced by a silence that carried weight. He did not raise his voice, did not rush his words. But when he spoke, it cut through everything. "Remove them," he said, simple, direct, and absolute. And the command did not echo. It did not need to, because it was not a request, and it was not open for interpretation. Reeves hesitated, just a fraction, caught between protocol and the reality unfolding in front of him, his eyes flicking to the badge, then back to the man, then to Ava, as if trying to piece together a version of events that made sense, but nothing aligned the way it had before. The narrative he had constructed no longer held, and the longer he stood there, the more it unraveled. The crowd leaned in closer, the phone still raised but now steadier, capturing not just an incident but a shift, a reversal that had not yet fully revealed itself. Ava did not speak, did not move, her posture unchanged, her calm intact, as if she had already stepped beyond the moment even while standing inside it. The man's gaze never left her, not demanding, not questioning, simply present. And that presence alone carried more authority than anything said so far. The agent extended his hand slightly toward the cuffs, a quiet reinforcement of the command that had already been given, and Reeves finally moved, his fingers working at the metal with less certainty than before, the sound of the mechanism unlocking sharper now in the stillness. And as the pressure released, something else shifted with it, something invisible but undeniable, like a balance correcting itself after being forced out of place. Ava slowly brought her hands forward, rubbing her wrist once, not in pain but in acknowledgement, her eyes lifting to meet the man's. And in that brief exchange there was no explanation, no introduction, just understanding, the kind that did not need to be spoken aloud. And behind them the second SUV remained idling, its presence a quiet signal that whatever had just begun was far from over. The air did not rush back in when the cuffs came off. It stayed suspended, thick with the weight of what had just changed, and Ava lowered her hand slowly, her fingers brushing over her wrist once before falling still at her sides, her posture unchanged, her composure intact, as if the metal had never defined her to begin with. And the man standing before her gave a slight nod, not exaggerated, not performative, just enough to acknowledge that the moment had been corrected but not erased, his eyes shifting briefly toward the evidence bag still held in Reeves' hand, the cracked phone inside catching a sliver of sunlight. And that single detail seemed to matter more than anything else left in the scene. Her phone, the man said, his voice even, and Reeves hesitated again, the delay smaller this time, but still visible. As if every action now required reconsideration, he extended the bag forward, careful, controlled, the confidence from minutes earlier replaced by something quieter, something closer to awareness. The agent took it and immediately opened the seal, handing the device back to Ava with both hands, a gesture that carried more respect than any apology spoken aloud. And when she accepted it, her touch was steady, her gaze calm, her thumb brushing lightly across the fractured glass as the screen flickered to life. For a brief second, the reflection of the gathered crowd shimmered across it, distorted, fragmented, just like the assumptions that had brought them here. She did not scroll, did not hesitate. She simply tapped once and held the phone to her ear, the movement precise, intentional, and the man watched closely, not impatient, not anxious, just present, as if what came next had already been anticipated. The street remained silent except for the low hum of engines and distant city noise, the bystanders now quieter, their earlier curiosity replaced by a cautious stillness, sensing that this was no longer something to react to but something to witness. Reeves shifted his weight, his eyes no longer fixed on Ava but flicking between her and the man beside her, trying to place him, trying to understand the authority that had altered everything without explanation. And then Ava spoke, her voice low, clear, carrying just enough to be heard by those closest. "I am here," she said, no urgency, no fear, just a statement that seemed to land somewhere beyond the street itself. She listened for a moment, her expression unchanged, then added, "Yes, it has already been handled." And that word settled into the space like a quiet verdict. Handled, not resolved, not dismissed, but acknowledged in a way that suggested something larger was already in motion. She lowered the phone slowly, her eyes lifting to meet the man's again. And this time there was the faintest shift, not relief, not triumph, but something closer to completion, like a step in a process that was still unfolding. The man gave another small nod, then turned slightly, his attention now moving toward Reeves, not sharply, not aggressively, but with a focus that made it impossible to ignore. And in that moment the roles in the street had fully reversed, not through force, not through volume, but through something far quieter, far more absolute. And behind them, the second SUV's engine continued its low, steady hum. A reminder that what had just happened was only the beginning of what would follow. Reeves felt the weight of the man's attention before he fully met his eyes, like stepping into a space where excuses no longer held their shape. And for the first time since the stop began, his voice did not come easily. "Sir, we were responding to a call," he said, the words careful, measured, but lacking the certainty they once carried. The man listened without interruption, his expression unreadable, not cold, not angry, just still in a way that made every word hang longer than intended, the kind of stillness that invited truth whether it was offered or not. And around them the city seemed to resume in slow motion, cars passing at a distance, a horn somewhere far off. But none of it touched the center of the moment where everything had shifted. Ava stood just to the side now, her phone resting lightly in her hand, her presence quiet but grounding, not removed from the scene but no longer confined by it. As if she had stepped out of the version of the story written for her and into one she had always belonged to. The agent beside the man adjusted his stance slightly, his gaze moving between Reeves and the bystanders, aware that what was unfolding was being witnessed from every angle, recorded in fragments that would outlast the moment itself. "What description?" the man asked finally, his tone even, and the question did not accuse, it revealed. It asked not just for an answer but for the clarity behind it. And Reeves hesitated again, the details that had felt solid minutes ago now thinning under scrutiny. "We received a report of suspicious activity," he replied, choosing his words carefully. But even as he spoke, the phrase sounded distant, detached from the reality standing in front of him. The man nodded once, slowly, as if acknowledging the process without validating the outcome. Then his eyes shifted briefly to Ava, then back, a silent comparison that required no explanation. "And you confirmed that?" he asked, and the pause that followed stretched longer than any before. Reeves opened his mouth, then closed it, the answer no longer simple, no longer immediate, and that hesitation spoke louder than anything he could have said. The crowd sensed it too, the subtle unraveling of authority that had once felt unquestioned, and in that space, something deeper settled, not anger, not confrontation, but awareness, the kind that does not arrive all at once but stays once it is there. Ava's gaze moved across the scene briefly, not lingering on anyone, not seeking validation, just observing, as if committing the moment to memory without needing to hold on to it. And then the man shifted his stance slightly, a small movement that signaled the next step without announcing it. "This will be reviewed," he said, his voice calm, definitive, not as a threat, not as a warning, but as a statement of process that extended beyond the street, beyond the moment, into something structured, accountable, and real. And Reeves nodded, once. His posture straighter now but different, less rigid, more aware, as if standing in a position he now understood carried more than authority, it carried consequence. And behind them the second SUV's engine finally lowered, the hum softening as if the tension had begun to release. But the quiet that followed was not empty. It was full of everything that had just been seen, heard, and understood. And as Ava took a single step forward, not hurried, not hesitant, the space opened for her. Without resistance, without instruction, and for the first time since the moment began, the path ahead was hers alone. The space did not return to normal. It shifted into something quieter, heavier, as Ava continued forward one measured step at a time, her shoes pressing lightly against the pavement, the sound barely audible, yet somehow grounding everything around it. The crowd parted without being told, a natural movement, subtle and respectful, as if something unspoken had been understood by everyone at once. And she did not rush, did not look back, her gaze steady ahead, her posture upright, carrying a calm that felt stronger than anything raised in authority just minutes before. The man remained where he stood, watching her for a brief second longer before turning slightly, his attention returning to the scene behind her, but not with urgency, with control, the kind that did not need to assert itself to be recognized. And the agent beside him took a small step back, allowing space, signaling that whatever needed to happen next would not happen in haste. Reeves stayed still, his hands now empty, the absence of the cuffs more noticeable than their presence had been, his fingers flexing, once at his sides as if adjusting to a reality that had shifted beyond his expectation. His eyes followed Ava for a moment, not in defiance, not in challenge, but in something quieter, something closer to reflection, the kind that does not arrive immediately but lingers, asking questions long after the moment passes. And around them the phones slowly lowered, one by one, as the energy that had driven the crowd shifted from curiosity to something more restrained, more thoughtful, the spectacle fading into understanding. And Ava reached the edge of the open space, her hand brushing lightly against the side of the black SUV as she passed, not to steady herself, but as a quiet acknowledgement of the presence that had arrived without needing explanation. The door opened before she reached for it, smooth, deliberate, and she paused for the briefest second, not hesitating, just allowing the moment to settle, the weight of everything that had just unfolded pressing into that single breath. And in that pause there was no anger, no visible frustration, only a composed stillness, the kind that holds its own dignity without demanding recognition. She stepped inside without a word, the door closing behind her with a soft, controlled sound that seemed louder than it should have been, final in a way that marked the end of one version of the moment and the beginning of another. The engine shifted slightly, the low hum deepening as if readying to move, but the vehicle did not pull away. Immediately, it waited, as if the scene itself had not fully completed, and back on the street the man took one final look around, not searching, not questioning, just observing, ensuring that what had been corrected remained so. And then his gaze returned briefly to the space Ava had just left, the absence she left behind more present than the crowd that remained. And for a second the street felt different, quieter, not because the noise had disappeared, but because something unseen had been realigned, something deeper than a simple misunderstanding, something that would not leave as easily as the vehicles about to depart. And as the first SUV finally began to move, rolling forward at a slow, controlled pace, the second following just behind, the distance between them measured and precise, the moment did not end. It settled, embedding itself into the silence that followed, where no one spoke, yet everyone understood that what had just happened was not something that could be undone, only remembered inside the SUV. The world outside softened into muted motion, storefronts and traffic lights sliding past the tinted windows in quiet streaks of color, while Ava sat still, her hands resting lightly in her lap, the faint imprint of the cuffs no longer visible but not entirely gone, her thumb tracing absent-mindedly along the edge of her phone as if anchoring herself to something steady, something familiar. Across from her the man sat angled slightly, not imposing, not distant, simply present, his posture relaxed in a way that carried more authority than tension ever could. For a moment neither of them spoke, the silence not awkward but intentional, like a space allowed for breath after something that demanded it. And then he broke it, his voice low, measured. "You should have told us you were coming in early." The words gentle, not a reprimand but an acknowledgement of what had nearly unfolded differently. Ava lifted her gaze to meet his, her expression calm, unchanged. "It was not supposed to be a visit," she replied, her tone even, as if the explanation existed beyond the need to justify it. He nodded once, absorbing the meaning without pressing further, his eyes shifting briefly to the city passing outside before returning to her. "Still," he said, quieter now, "it should not have happened." And that was the closest he came to naming it. Not the stop, not the cuffs, but the space between what should have been and what was. Ava's fingers stilled on her phone, her gaze lowering for a brief second before returning, steady as before. "It happens," she said, not bitter, not resigned, just factual, and that simplicity carried more weight than any accusation could have. The man leaned back slightly, his hand resting against the armrest as he studied her for a moment, not searching for weakness, but understanding. "That does not make it acceptable," he replied, his tone firm in a way that did not need volume. And for the first time there was a shift, subtle but present, in Ava's expression, not a change in composure, but in depth, like a thought passing through that she chose not to speak aloud. The vehicle slowed briefly at an intersection, the light outside shifting from red to green, casting a soft glow across the interior before fading again, and in that fleeting change of light, something unspoken settled between them, a shared awareness that extended beyond the moment on the street, beyond the vehicles and the crowd, into something that had existed long before and would continue after. The agent in the front seat adjusted slightly, glancing into the rearview mirror before returning his attention forward, aware without intruding, present without interrupting, and the city continued moving, unaware of the quiet conversation unfolding within a vehicle that carried more than just two passengers. Ava exhaled slowly, her shoulders easing. Just a fraction, not from relief, but from release, like setting down something invisible that had been carried without acknowledgement. And she looked at him again, her voice softer now. "I did not call because I wanted to see how it would be handled." The admission calm, deliberate, and it landed in the space between them with quiet clarity. He did not react immediately, his gaze steady, absorbing the implication, the test that had never been announced, and after a moment, he gave a small nod. Not defensive, not surprised, just understanding. "And now you have," he said, and the words did not close the moment. They opened it, leaving something unresolved yet undeniable, something that neither of them needed to name as the vehicle moved forward into the flow of the city, carrying with it a silence that spoke louder than anything that had come before. The SUV moved steadily through the city, each block passing with quiet precision as the rhythm of traffic returned to something ordinary. But inside the vehicle, nothing felt ordinary anymore. The silence between Ava and the man had changed, no longer just reflective but deliberate, like both of them understood that what had happened was not isolated, not accidental, but part of something larger that could not be ignored. Ava's gaze drifted briefly toward the window, the reflection of her face faint against the tinted glass, layered over passing buildings and distant pedestrians. and for a moment it looked like two versions of her existed at once. One inside the vehicle, composed and still, and another outside, walking through a world that did not always recognize her the same way. Her fingers tightened slightly around her phone, before relaxing again, a small motion that did not go unnoticed. "You were right to test it," the man said finally, his voice calm, carrying no defensiveness, only acknowledgement. Ava did not respond immediately, her eyes still on the shifting reflection, as if considering whether the outcome matched the expectation she had carried into it. "It should not depend on who I am," she said after a moment, her voice quiet but clear, and the words settled heavily, not confrontational, but undeniable. The kind of truth that does not need to be raised to be heard. The man inclined his head slightly, absorbing it fully. "It does not," he replied. But even as he said it, the pause that followed suggested he understood the difference between what should be and what had just been seen. Ava turned her gaze back toward him, not challenging, not accusing, simply present in the reality of that difference. And for a second neither of them spoke, the weight of the moment filling the space more than any words could. The agent in the front seat adjusted the rearview mirror subtly, his eyes flicking up for a fraction of a second before returning forward, aware that the conversation behind him carried implications beyond the ride itself. The SUV slowed as it approached a secured building, its glass facade reflecting the late afternoon light in sharp, clean lines. The vehicle turning smoothly into a private entrance where another guard stood waiting, posture straight, eyes alert, and as the gate opened, the transition from public street to controlled space felt immediate, almost symbolic. Ava watched it happen without expression, her gaze steady, as if noting the contrast without needing to comment on it. The vehicle came to a gradual stop beneath the overhang, the engine lowering to a quiet hum, and for a brief second no one moved, the moment stretching just long enough to hold everything that had been said and everything that had not. The man shifted slightly, his attention returning fully to her. "There will be a report," he said, his tone measured, not as a reassurance, but as a statement of action that would follow. Ava nodded once, not in agreement, not in acceptance, but in acknowledgement that the process would continue beyond this moment. Her hand moved to the door handle, pausing there for a second as if marking the end of one space and the beginning of another, and before she stepped out, she spoke once more, her voice soft but steady. "Make sure it changes something." And the words remained in the air even after the door opened, even as she stepped out into the filtered light beneath the building, leaving behind a silence that no longer felt unresolved, but waiting. The door closed behind Ava with a soft, controlled sound that echoed faintly beneath the steel and glass above her. And for a moment she stood still under the filtered light, the city noise now distant, replaced by the quiet order of a place where everything moved with intention, her reflection faintly visible in the polished surface of the entrance doors, composed, steady, unchanged, as if the street she had just left existed miles away instead of minutes. A security officer nodded as she passed, respectful, precise, the kind of acknowledgement that followed recognition. But Ava did not slow, her steps measured, her gaze forward, the rhythm of her movement unbroken. Behind her the SUV remained where it had stopped, the engine idling softly as the man sat for a second longer before stepping out, his posture straight, his expression unreadable but grounded in something deeper than authority, something quieter. He watched her walk ahead for a brief moment, not to follow, not to lead, but to observe, as if the space between them carried meaning of its own. The agent moved to his side, speaking in a low tone that did not carry beyond the immediate air, but the man did not respond right away, his attention still fixed on Ava as she reached the interior doors, her hand pressing against the glass, the motion simple, deliberate, and as the doors opened, the light inside shifted across her face, illuminating it fully for the first time since the moment began, revealing nothing hidden, only clarity. She stepped through without hesitation, the doors closing behind her just as quietly as they had opened. And in that instant the scene completed itself, not with resolution, but with understanding, the kind that does not need to be declared to exist. The man finally turned, his focus returning to the present, to the process that would follow, the review, the report, The chain of decisions that would ripple outward from a moment that had started on an ordinary street. But as he began to walk, there was a pause, small but noticeable, as if something Ava had said remained, not as a challenge, but as a standard, something that could not be filed away or reduced to procedure, something that would remain in the space long after the details were written down. And across the city, far from the quiet entrance where the vehicles now pulled away, Officer Reeves stood where the moment had first shifted, the street returning to its usual pace around him. Cars passing, conversations resuming, but he did not move immediately, his gaze fixed on the space where the SUV had been, his posture no longer rigid but not relaxed either, caught somewhere in between, and for the first time, the absence of certainty felt heavier than its presence had ever been. He exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering just slightly as the reality of what had unfolded settled into something he could not dismiss, not because of who she was, but because of how it had happened, and that distinction remained, quiet but persistent, like a question without an easy answer. And as the last trace of the vehicles disappeared into the distance, the street looked the same, sounded the same, but for those who had been there, something had shifted in a way that would not be undone, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the quiet understanding that justice, when it finally arrives, does not raise its voice. It simply stands, and everything else has to adjust around it.